Okay, so before we begin, I just want to review a couple points that people had asked last time. I'd rather not be open for questions during, unless there's like Pasha, like what's a word mean. Also, I'm going to try to do a little more inside, to read, the Iker is the Shulchan Aruch Shach and Taz, that's the Iker. Just want to run through a couple points from last time that just maybe require clarification. I mentioned last time that Min HaTorah, on a biblical level, Basar b'chalav is only forbidden if it's cooked together. If it's not cooked together, it's only rabbinic. I also mentioned that cooking through heat is whenever there's issues. If there's no heat, there's no transfer of flavors unless you're dealing with salting or kavush, which is soaking, or an onion and a knife. But b'derech klal, if it's heat, is when there's an issue. So the question that people wanted clarification is, how hot is cooking? How hot is cooking? We're talking about bishul, isavashel. So the truth is, we're going to get to all this later. The definition of cooking, kli rishon, kli sheni, a ladle, iro kli rishon, iro kli sheni. We'll get to all this later on. But I will say this, the general concept when you're dealing with cooking and you're dealing with heat is the yad soledas. That's the general temperature that is going to be an issue. If something is not yad soledas, and I'll define yad soledas in a moment, if it's not yad soledas, there's not going to be a transfer of flavor. Yad soledas is usually when it's defined as cooking. That's the temperature. What is yad soledas? Or Moshe Feinstein said it's 110 to 160. That range is yad soledas. So once it hits 110, it's considered cooking in halacha. 110 is not very hot, but that's from Moshe Shita, that once it hits yad soledas, then it's considered cooking again, at least albeit to be machmer. Also, I wanted to mention, I talked last time about deraisa versus derabanan. What's basar b'chalav deraisa versus basar b'chalav derabanan? I didn't really get into the differences because it doesn't, deraisa derabanan are all aser. I will say this, and this is going to be touched on later on in taruvas, so much later on. You're programmed to think that if something's derabanan, you could be lenient in many cases as opposed to deraisa. It's not so true by basar b'chalav. Basar b'chalav, we're going to see, they were pretty strict. Chazal were pretty strict by basar b'chalav because they knew that if you give people an inch, they'll take a lot. So Chazal were pretty strict by basar b'chalav. Again, I normally print out the sheets. I did not print out the sheets this time, but it's really just Shulchan Aruch. I happen to have, there's a set of Shulchan Aruch in the front and there's a set of Shulchan Aruch in the back. Yerdei Chelik Aleph, which is Siman Pei Zayin, just if anyone doesn't have. So we will get to it, as we're going to see later on. We wait 6 hours by chicken, after eating chicken, between chicken and milk, even though chicken and milk is derabanan, according to the overwhelming majority of shitas, and yet we still wait 6 hours. The reason being is because they were strict. So I didn't really get into what's deraisa, what's derabanan. We'll talk about that later. One last point I wanted to make, and then we'll begin, just to clarify from last time. Again, I mentioned that doraisa is bishul. If it's not cooked together, it's only rabbinic. So I mentioned, what's the definition of cooking? So I said that it's a shaila of whether frying or pan-searing is considered cooking, but the overwhelming majority of shitas, the accepted hanhaga of Klal Yisrael, of the Paiskim, is that if it's cooked with heat, it's bishul. Whether it's cooked in liquid, whether it's roasted and fried or sauteed, heat is cooking. That's the thing. So I forgot to mention, there's a shaila in the Paiskim, what about a microwave? If you cook something, basar b'chalav, in a microwave, is it considered cooking? Is it considered cooking? So a microwave is unique because it cooks it heats up the molecules. The food gets hot, but the walls stay cold. It's a very unique experience. Unlike an oven where the walls get hot, a microwave, it stays cold. So the poskim throughout halacha are always trying to figure out what's the status of a microwave. So it's negeya 3 categories that they talk about microwaves. This might be an extra credit on the test. Like, what are the 3 categories that they talk about microwaves? So they talk about it for Hilchos Shabbos. Hilchos Shabbos is a one sugya of there's biblical cooking on Shabbos and rabbinic cooking on Shabbos. And Moshe Feinstein had a famous discussion about whether microwaves are biblical or rabbinic, but that's a separate sugya. It's also very negeya regarding bishul akum. What does that mean? I don't know. I said it too long ago. What does that mean? I don't know. So the point is, when it comes to bishul akum, it's also a shaila. If a guy cooks in the microwave milk and meat together, is it a problem of bishul akum? So again, is it considered cooking or not? It happens to be for bishul akum. Rabbi Olbam has a tshuva about it in I think Chelik Aleph of his Minchas Chen. It's either Chelik Aleph or Chelik Gimel. I don't remember which one, but he talks about it. And modern day Psak, it's a machlekes, the star K and the OU of whether it's considered a problem of Bishul Akum. It's negeya if you have a situation where there's a guy in your house and you know is an older person and the guy they can't turn the fire on. At least a microwave would be better because it's a machlekes. So over here also, if a person cooks basar b'chalav in a microwave, is it deraisa or is it derabanan? If you look in the kosher kitchen by Rabbi Forrest, he says it's undecided. So it's a shaila. Okay, let's start. I'd like to get to today. We're going to start Sif Beis. There's Bishul Akum, there's Shabbos, and then there's our discussion of Basar b'chalav. So we'll start. Sif Beis doesn't have anything on it. We'll just run through the Shulchan Aruch. There's nothing else. And Sif Gimel has a lot. Sif Gimel has a lot. We will not be able to finish Sif Gimel today, but I'm going to try to go through the Shach inside. The Shach and the Taz often have very similar discussions. It would be very easy for me to just summarize what they say and not go through it, but then that's not really what this is about, because then we could run through Basar b'chalav in a couple months, and that's not the point of this. So I'm going to try to go through the Shach inside. The Shach and Taz are very similar. I'm not going to usually repeat Shach and Taz when they both say the same thing, because we don't have enough time for that, but we'll do the Shach. So the Mechaber says in Beis, Gedi lav dafka, although the Torah says, Lo yisavashel Gedi b'chalev mo, and Gedi is a goat, the truth is it's lav dafka a goat. The same halacha applies to a cow. Hu adin shar, seh, ez. It's the same halacha by a lamb, by a cow, by a bull. It's all the same. V'loishna b'chalav aim, loishna b'chalav acheres. And although the Torah says the mother's milk, it doesn't have to be the mother's milk. Any milk would apply. The pasuk was talking about the most common application. The most common animals that they used to eat back then. They didn't eat cows because cows were very expensive. They ate goats. And oftentimes the mother's milk, I guess, is what they had. Okay, fine, but it does not have to be the mother's milk, and it doesn't have to be a goat. Fine. Sif Gimel. Now, Sif Gimel has many components to it. We're going to go through it slowly. And like I said, we're not going to finish it all today because there's too much. We'll get to it next week, Bez Hashem, we'll finish up. And you should know, after Sif Gimel, the rest of the Siman will fly. It's much, much, much easier, the rest of the Siman. This is the most things are found in Sif Gimel. So let's go through it slowly. The Mechaber says like this: Einoi noyeg ela bebasar behema tahora, bechalav behema tahora. Basar bechalav on a biblical level, or even on a rabbinic level, only applies to kosher milk and kosher meat. So cow meat and cow milk. Avol basar tahora bechalav tameya. But if you take cow meat, beef, and you cook it in pig milk, oy basar tameya bechalav tahora. You take a pork chop and you cook a pork chop in milk, so you're cooking meat and milk together, but one of them is pork. The halacha is mutarim. It is mutar bibishol ubahana. It is not basar b'chalav at all. You're allowed to cook it. You're allowed to benefit from it. Now, are you allowed to eat it? Mitzad basar b'chalav, yes, but it's pork. Meaning, in other words, it is not basar b'chalav at all. It's completely pork. That's all it is. So you're not allowed to eat it because it's chazer anyway. It's chazer deraisa. So you're not allowed to eat it because it's pork, but you're allowed to cook it and you're allowed to sell it. There is zero basar b'chalav when one of the items is biblically forbidden. I'll just call it pork from now on. If it's pork, it's not basar b'chalav at all. Okay, that's point number one in the Mechaber. Point number two in the Mechaber. Oif, ubasar chaya v'oif, and the meat of a chaya, like a deer, v'oif, and bird, chicken. Afilu b'chalav tahira mutar b'bishul ubahana. You're allowed to cook milk and chicken together. Milk and chicken is only derabanan, so you're allowed to cook it. You're allowed to sell it. V'af ba'achila ine asal miderabanan, and it's only rabbinically forbidden. And as we said last time, something that's only derabanan is only asar ba'achila derabanan, but there's no isser bishul at all, and there's no isser hana. So you could take chicken parm, you can't eat it rabbinically, but you could cook it and you could sell it. That's point number two. Now, the Mechaber ends off, I think this is also point number three, Dogim v'chagovim ein behem iser afilu midrabana. Fish is no problem at all. You could take fish, and you could take cream cheese, so you can cook fish in milk or fish in butter, and that's lox, right? You could take lox, and you could take cream cheese, and you could eat it together. There is no problem of fish at all. I'm sorry, skip chagam. Dogim v'chagam. Chagam are grasshoppers. If you're the type of, if you have a Messiah on grasshoppers, you could eat grasshoppers in milk as well. Ein b'hem isar afilu midirabanan. That's point number three. And then point number 4. And we're going to go through each one slowly. Again, there's a lot today. Point number 4 is as follows. This is going to take us into the conversation of Maris Ayin. Let me just explain what Maris Ayin is. Maris Ayin means that you're doing something which is permitted, but it's a bad optic. So what's an example of Maris Ayin? So you take meat and you're cooking it in almond milk. So technically almond milk is completely permissible. The problem is it's a bad optic. It looks bad. Says the Ramah, V'nogu la'asais cholav mishkedim. The halacha is that the minig is to take almond milk, that they would take almond milk, which is not milk in halacha, u'menichan ba basar oif, and they would take chicken and cook it in almond milk. Hayil ve'enoi rak midrabanan. Let me explain what the Ramah Shita is, and we'll talk more about this next time. The Ramah Shita is there a problem of Maris Ayin? He would tell you it depends. Maris Ayin means that it looks like I'm doing something wrong. So is Maris Ayin a thing? The Ramah would respond, it depends. What does it look like I'm doing? If it looks like I'm doing a biblical prohibition, then it's a problem. But if it looks like I'm doing a rabbinic prohibition, then it's fine. In other words, what am I doing? I'm taking almond milk and I'm cooking something in the almond milk. Well, what am I cooking in the almond milk? What does it look like I'm doing? How bad is it? If I take chicken and cook it in the almond milk, what does it look like I'm doing? Worst case scenario, it looks like I'm cooking chicken and milk. Chicken and milk is only derabanan. There is no maris ayin on an issa derabanan according to the Ramah. But to take beef and cook it in almond milk, where if what it looks like I'm doing, it looks like I'm doing an issa deraisa, right? It looks like I'm taking meat and cooking it in milk. So what it looks like I'm doing is an issa deraisa mamish. There is maris ayin on an issa deraisa. So says the Ramah, I'll read it again. No gulasas chol mishkedin. They would take almond milk, u'manichem babasar b'oif, and they would cook chicken in the almond milk. Why? Hayil ve'ena rak midrabanan. Because worst case scenario, what it looks like I'm doing is only an issa derabanan. So because it looks like what I'm doing is all worst case scenario, even if they're choshed me inappropriately, it's only an issa derabanan. It's fine. Aval basar behema, but to take beef and to cook it in almond milk, beef in almond milk, where if it's taka milk, the way it looks like basar b'chol of deraisa, then it's a problem. So how do I rectify it? So I can't do that. I can't cook something in almond milk. And by the way, next time we'll talk about what about maris ayin in a restaurant, and I'll get to the practical stuff because I think that's the whole point of the share. I want to get very practical. Also, is maris ayin subjective? You know, Amol, they used to not have margarine in the beginning was a problem. But nowadays, these things become more common. So maris ayin is more subjective. Nowadays, it gets a little bit better. But the point is, says the Ramah, so if I'm taking meat and putting it in almond milk, it's a bad optic. So it's a problem. So how do I rectify it? You have to put almonds on the table so that it... Basically, it's like putting the wrapper. You put the almonds there so that people see the milk, they'll see the almonds, and they'll know, oh, it's almond milk. And the source is from dam. What is this dam referring to? So we'll see this next time. Dam was referring to fish blood. The halacha is, can I drink fish blood? Now, today's aliyah in Shnai Mikra, drinking cow blood is chayiv kares. It's a very, very big aver to drink cow blood. I'm drinking fish blood, which is technically allowed. So the halacha is, it's a bad optic. Fish blood looks like cow blood. So what do you have to do? You have to take scales and put it into the cup. So when you're drinking, people will see the scales and they'll know that, oh, it's fish blood. So you see that's the way to rectify maris ayin. So to over here, you put almonds out. That's the way to rectify maris ayin as well. Okay. Now we'll talk next time. By the way, I'll just mention, again, I'll review this next time. The way to rectify the maris ayin is putting almonds on the table. Now, imagine you're walking into someone's house on a Friday and they're cooking. It's pretty chaotic. You see some almonds on the counter. It's not the biggest sign. It's not like a big sign. So Rav Belsky said, you see from here, it doesn't take a lot to remove maris ayin. You don't need that much. So he used to say that if you have fake cheese on a sandwich, on a meat sandwich, the way to remove maris ayin is merely writing on the menu that it's fake cheese. That's enough. Even though it's not, it's not a giant poster, but it's enough of a hecker as the almonds in the mechaber. Okay, we'll talk about this next time. Okay, now let's go back and let's do the shach in Sivkatim Gimel. Now, again, the first thing the mechaber had said was that basar b'chalav does not apply at all with chazer. So if you have pork and you cook pork in milk, it is mutter, bibishlu b'hana. It's nothing. It is not basar b'chalav whatsoever. Now let's go through the shach inside carefully, because I think it's a very important shach, because it introduces a concept called chanan. And chanan is one of the biggest sugyas in taruvas and basar b'chalav. So I think, and by the way, you may not get chanan right away. It's a complicated concept, but it's the more you hear it. So I want to get it into people's minds now, because it'll come up multiple times. So says the shach. Again, according to the Mechaber's lashon is very clear that if you take pork and you cook it in milk, it is not basar b'chalav at all. You're allowed to cook it, you're allowed to sell it. The only issue is it's pork. So you can't eat it because it's pork, but it's not basar b'chalav whatsoever. Now, if you look in the shach begins in Sifkat and Gimel. Lashon hatur, the tur, which the Shulchan Aruch is based on, has a slightly different lashon. And the Shulchan Aruch, if you notice, if you're very careful, the Shulchan Aruch deviated from the lashon of the tur. The tur says as follows: Basar tahora b'chalav behema tameya. If you take beef and cook it in pork milk, in pig milk, basar tameya b'chalav tahora, or if you cook a pork chop in milk, ubasar chayav ha'of, or chicken in regular milk, einoi ela midirabanan. It's rabbinic. Umutar b'bishul ubahana. The implication of the tur is that if you take a pork chop and you cook it in milk, he doesn't say it's not basar b'chalav, he says midirabanan. The implication of the tur is that it's rabbinic basar b'chalav. So if I take pork and I cook it in milk and I want to eat it, so what's the problem? So according to the Shulchan Aruch, it's pork. According to the tur, it's pork and it's rabbinic basar b'chalav. That's the tur, because the tur says derabanan, which means that on top of being pork, it's also rabbinic basar b'chalav. So says that's the tur. The Kosav Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, his commentary on the tur is called Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch writes in his commentary, the Kosav Beis Yosef, Shalashon she'ena mechuvenhu. It's not an appropriate lashon. His lashon of the tur is incorrect, because the tur implies that it's basar b'chalav derabanan, but that doesn't make any sense. Why? Demasha Kosav ein ela miderabanan. That which the tur says that it's rabbinic, leimatzi koi el chayav ha'of b'chalav tahora. It must be referring to chicken. Chicken and milk is derabanan. De'ila basar tahora b'chalav tameya yipcha, because if he's talking about a pork chop, loy eshkachin she'asura chacham b'achila mishum basar b'chalav. We do not find a source that it's rabbinically forbidden. We don't find that. V'gam loy hoya inyan lo asay midivreim. Also, what is the point of asering it? And this line is actually very significant. Again, the Tur says that if you take a pork chop and cook it in milk, it's rabbinically forbidden as basar b'chalav. Says the Beis Yosef, where are you getting that from? Number one, and number two, matam la'asr lo hoya inyan la'asro. What are we doing here? What's the point? Now, that line is very significant. Acha shekvar hu asr. It's already pork. What do I gain by making it basar b'chalav derabanan when it's already a pork chop? What am I gaining exactly? V'oibin min haTorah. It's already forbidden min haTorah, because it's pork. Mishum basar tameh, yachalav tameh. Ad kan. That's what the Beis Yosef says. Lokach tikun kan halashon. And therefore, when he wrote his sefer, he changed it. V'yafakivin. And he's appropriate, says the Shach. Good. So you have according to the Tur, it's derabanan basar b'chalav, and says the Beis Yosef, I don't agree. Now, why does the Beis Yosef not agree? Because the Beis Yosef says, what do I gain here that it's derabanan? It's already a pork chop. What am I? So let me say outside, and then we'll see it inside. The Bach understood the Beis Yosef as sort of saying as follows: once it's already it's also deraisa because it's a pork chop. When he said there's no point in making it basar b'chalav derabanan, there's no point in making it rabbinic basar b'chalav, he thought that the Beis Yosef was saying that there's no point, that you don't gain anything practically. Meaning, once something is doraisa, I don't really know what you gain. To that, the Bach says, I have a clever idea. I think you gain as follows. I think there's a chumrah. Meaning, they thought the Beis Yosef was saying, once it's already deraisa, what's the chumrah of making it derabanan? It's already deraisa. Deraisa is worse than derabanan. That the Bach is going to say as follows. I have a chumrah. And this is the concept called chanan. Now, this is very important because chanan comes up a lot. Again, I remember when I did this the first time, chanan took me a very long time to figure out. Chanan means chaticha nasas nevela. Ches, nun, strechel, nun. Chanan is an acronym for chaticha nasas nevela. Chanan means as follows. Okay, this is what chanan means. I have pork. Let's go with pork. Okay. Is chanan a thing or not? So what is chanan? Chanan means as follows. We know that something is nullified in 60 times. So if I have a pork chop that's 1 ounce, that falls into a 60-ounce cholent, it's nullified, 1 in 60, easy. What if I have an ounce pork chop, a 1 ounce pork chop, that gets cooked with a 10-ounce steak? That's no good, right? That's a problem, because it's not 60. So the 10-ounce steak is usser. So far, so good. How much of that, how do we look at the 10-ounce steak? There's 2 ways to look at it. And this is very negeya. There's 2 ways to look at this 10-ounce steak. The first way to look at this 10-ounce steak is that it's a sponge that's housing 1 ounce of isser in it. So therefore, if that 10-ounce steak were to fall in a 60-ounce cholent, it would be fine. You say, well, 60 ounces is not 60 times 10 ounces. Yeah, but it's not, the steak is not a piece of isser. The steak is housing 1 ounce of isser in it, like a sponge. And then if it were falling into a 60-ounce cholent pot, it would be fine. If you say chanan means chaticha nasis nevela, that the 10-ounce steak becomes 10 ounces of isser. Not that it's housing 1 ounce, but it becomes mamish, a 10 ounce of new isser. That's the way you look at chanan. Chanan always by definition means you have a case as follows. You have the first time that they're cooking, and then that item that becomes forbidden falls into a second category. This is by far the trickiest part of today's thing, and if you get it good, if not, you'll listen to it again. So basically, the 2 ways to look at it is, again, you have a 1 ounce piece of pork that gets cooked with a 10-ounce steak. The 10-ounce steak is for sure a problem. There's no question about that, but there's 2 ways to look at the 10-ounce steak. You could look at it as it's a problem because it's a sponge that's housing 1 ounce in it. But if that 10-ounce steak were to fall into 60 ounces of kosher meat, it would be fine, because that 1 ounce would purge, and it's fine. Or do you say, no, chaticha nasis nevela. The chaticha nasis nevela. It becomes 10 ounces of isser. And therefore, it's not going to work with 60 ounces. You need 600 ounces. That's the shaila of chaticha nasis nevela. So how do we paskin? Now we Ashkenazim paskin, chaticha nasis nevela applies to everything. It applies to pork, it applies to lobster, it applies to basar b'chalav. However, the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch is that chanan only applies to basar b'chalav. What do I mean? According to the Shulchan Aruch, if I have 1 ounce of pork that gets cooked with 10 ounces of kosher meat, it's a problem. But it doesn't become pork. Where do we find? Why would it become pork? Where does the Torah just morph things? Nothing gets morphed. Why would you say chaticha nasis nevela, says the Shulchan Aruch? The Sfardim say, why would you say that? It's housing pork. It's housing 1 ounce. If it falls into 60 ounces, you're fine. But says the Shulchan Aruch, there's one situation that I agree of chanan, and that's by milk and meat. Why? If I have a steak, 10-ounce steak, that I cook 1 ounce of butter in that 10-ounce steak. Same question. Is steak's a problem? No question, it's a problem. 2 ways to look at it. Is it that the steak is housing 1 ounce of butter, or the entire steak becomes basar b'chalav? To that, the Shulchan Aruch says, that I believe in chanan. Why? Because the concept of chanan is a chiddush. It means that something changed here. That there was a 10-ounce steak of permissible thing, and then all of a sudden it became something new. The Shulchan Aruch says, I don't see the motivation to say something changed here by pork. Why would I say that a regular piece of meat that gets cooked with pork becomes pork? Where do we find such a thing? But by basar b'chalav, the concept of basar b'chalav is that this is permissible, and this is permissible, and when they get together, something new happens. Basar b'chalav is created. So the nature of basar b'chalav is that there's something new here. That's the nature of basar b'chalav. And therefore, says the Shulchan Aruch, I'm more inclined to say chaticha nasis nevela by basar b'chalav. So again, according to the Mechaber, chaticha nasis nevela only applies to basar b'chalav, not by chazer, not by lobster. So if I have 1 ounce of butter that gets cooked with 10 ounces of kosher steak, the steak is not just housing 1 ounce of milk. If it falls into 60 ounces of meat, it's not okay. The 10 ounces becomes basar b'chalav. So let's go back over here, says the Bach. What happens over here? I have a pork chop, doraisa. Cook it in milk. Says the Tur, it's aser d'Rabbanan. In addition to being pork, it's basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan. Says the Beis Yosef, I don't understand. What do you gain from this? Says the Bach, I'll tell you what you gain. Chanan. It's now because you yourself have a chumrah of chanan, that chanan exists only by basar b'chalav. I would tell you there's a case of chanan. If I have a 1 ounce pork chop that gets cooked with 5 ounces of milk, whatever it is, you now have, it triggers the rules of chanan. If then they cook with another item, which cooks with another item, again, you don't have to get too bogged down in the details. I don't want you to get lost in the details. The point is, chanan would happen. So the Bach understood that the Beis Yosef was sort of like playing like a riddle. Like, what do I gain? Tell me a chumrah by making it basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan when it's already pork. And the answer is chanan. Chanan is a stringency that only applies to basar b'chalav, not to pork. So now that it's basar b'chalav, if that steak were to cook with 5 ounces of meat, we don't say that 5 ounces of meat is housing the 1 ounce of this pork chop. No, it's basar b'chalav, and basar b'chalav transforms the whole thing. So the Bach understood that according to the Beis Yosef, he was more like saying, once it's doraisa, what's the chumrah of d'Rabbanan? I can't think of one. And the Bach's like, I can think of one. Chanan. So if you see it in Shach and Sad, again, if you do this, if you get this good, if not, we're going to have to move a little bit. The Shach says like this. The Bach, and I have it in mind, it's the first wide line in the red version. The Bach is asking on the Beis Yosef, Upirish, Datur asa leshmi'inon, that the chiddush of the tour, that the pork chop becomes basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan, v'nafkamina. What's the nafkamina? It's already asa d'oraisa. Le'in chaticha nasis nevela. It's nogeya chanan, the svirulei de'enoi ela b'basar b'chalav. Now he does say the next line, which I don't want to get into. It's called chaticha roy l'skabed, but I can't do it into right now. But it's negeya chanan. De'enoi ela basar b'chalav. V'chein chaticha roy l'skabed. V'chein pirish adrisha. Ulefi zeh. So says the Shach, according to the Bach, afil l'didan de'kaim elon. I'm sorry, skip this a little bit. I'm sorry. Enoi devad. V'doik. Ulefi ani asdaiti. But says the Shach, you missed the point. The Shach says the Bach missed the point of the Beis Yosef. Let me again say this outside, and then we'll see it inside. The Bach thought that the Beis Yosef was saying, once it's pork, what's the stringency of making it basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan? And then the Bach's like, ooh, I have a clever one, chanan. The Shach's like, you completely missed the point. It's not that, what's the stringency? Of course there's stringency that could be had if it becomes basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan. That's not what the Beis Yosef meant. What the Beis Yosef meant is, what's the motivation? Not what's the stringency, what's the motivation? Once something is usher, meaning, and this is a big yesod, by the way, kol terakula. Chazal don't make isurim d'Rabbanan just for fun. They don't make isurim d'Rabbanan just to make your life miserable. If something is usher as pork, of course the Bach is right. If you make it basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan, that'll create stringencies. That's not what the Beis Yosef meant. The Beis Yosef meant, what's the motivation? Chazal only make isurim d'Rabbanan when they'll work. If something is a pork chop and you're willing to eat it, an Issa d'Rabbanan, it's like an Issa d'Rabbanan, sweetie, it's not going to stop you. The Chazal are not going to make an Issa d'Rabbanan when something is already Asa d'Oraisa. Yes, the Bach is right. If you did make an Issa d'Rabbanan, it would be more stringent. But that's not the point. The point is, Chazal are not going to make an Issa d'Rabbanan. They only make Issa d'Rabbanan to prevent you from doing something. If something is already a pork chop, making it rabbinically basar b'chalav is not going to help you at all, because it's not going to stop you. Chazal make an Issa d'Rabbanan, milk and chicken. That's a rabbinic stringency. Why? Because they're afraid if you're going to cook a chicken parm, you might come to make a steak parm. Okay, that's fair. That's a good harchaka. But if something's already a pork chop, and you're going to say, well, once it's already a pork chop, well, I'll make another Issa d'Rabbanan on top of it just to make their life miserable. That's not how Chazal work. So says the Shach, first of all, we don't find a source that pork chop would also be basar b'chalav. And no Rishon says this. And the implication of the Rashi and Ran is not like this. And this is the word. V'gam ein tam klal. There is no purpose to this. Shechachomim yesru mishum basar b'chalav. There is no motivation for Chazal to make an Issa d'Rabbanan when you're not going to listen to it anyway. I understand why Chazal are going to make a rabbinic prohibition not to eat chicken and milk. I get that. Because he says, because if you eat a chicken parm, you might come to eat a steak parm. Fine. Because of a Rambam. What motivation would they have to make an Issa d'Rabbanan of a pork chop? It's already biblically forbidden. So what are we doing over here? He says, V'zer nir kavanas ha-Beis Yosef. So says Shashach, that's what the Beis Yosef means. When the Beis Yosef says that there's no time to make it, once it's a pork chop, why are we making it a rabbinic prohibition? He didn't mean to say that there's no stringencies that can be had from that. He's saying there's no motivation. And that's the pshat of the Beis Yosef. Now, by the way, just agav, I just want to mention something. Hopefully it's not too off topic, and then we'll go weiter. You see from the Shach, a big yisoid, Chazal don't make an Issa d'Rabbanan when it's not going to work. They don't just make an Issa d'Rabbanan to make your life crazy. I'll tell you a massive heter from the Tzitz Eliezer. This is a very big sugya. This is a big shaila. I don't have time right now, but I'll tell you like this. Motzei Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael, okay? It could be in America also, but in Eretz Yisrael it's super relevant. Motzei Shabbos, when Shabbos is over, you're rabbinically forbidden to do malacha until you say Baruch HaMavdu ben Kodesh L'chol. Although Shabbos is over, there's an Issa d'Rabbanan, you're not allowed to do malacha until you say Baruch HaMavdu ben Kodesh L'chol. Here's a shayla they have in Eretz Yisrael all the time. You want to call a cab on Motzei Shabbos. Not even Motzei Shabbos. You want to call a cab Sunday, Monday. Someone's a chilayni. He's not religious. He hasn't done Havdalah yet. You call him up, he's driving. He's mamish doing an Isser before doing Havdalah. Why is that allowed? And there's an obligation to do Havdalah until Tuesday. So until Tuesday, how do you call a cab who's not religious? So so there's some people say in the Shmir Shabbos Chasen brings down that some poskim say tell them Shavua Tov. And Shavua Tov, if they say Shavua Tov, maybe it's Havdalah. The problem is it's not Havdalah. Pashtus. Havdalah means you have to say Lahavdil bin Kodesh L'chol. Saying Shavua Tov is not, even though saying Good Shabbos could be Kiddush, Shavua Tov is not Havdalah Pashtus. So it's a problem. Again, what's the problem? The problem is there's an Issa d'Rabbanan of doing malacha before Havdalah. Chazal said you're not allowed to do malacha until you say Havdalah. And they're going to be doing that Isurim every time you're asking them to drive. They're doing Isurim. And by the way, it could be in America. If you have someone who's not religious and you ask, hey, can you give me a ride? They haven't said Havdalah. So obviously, if you could be mashpia on them to say Baruch HaMavdu ben Kodesh L'chol, great. But often that's not the case. So you know what the Tzitz Eliezer says? He doesn't quote this, but he mamishes a big heter. He says the Isser d'Rabbanan of Chazal, of doing malacha before Havdalah, is not just to make your life miserable. Chazal were talking to religious Jews who are going to make Havdalah, right? I finished Ma'ariv on Shabbos. Let's say I forgot to say Atachanatan. Okay, fine. I didn't say Havdalah yet. I'm a religious Jew. I'm going to make Havdalah. I want to drive home. Chazal are like, listen, we know you plan on doing it, but you might forget. So there's a rabbinic prohibition until you say the words Baruch HaMavdu ben Kodesh L'chol. Fine. But says it Tzitz Eliezer, a Jew who's not religious, the Isser d'Rabbanan is not going to motivate him to do Havdalah. Because he's not doing Havdalah anyway. So says it Tzitz Eliezer, Chazal did not make an Isser in such a matzav. Chazal don't make an Isser if it's not going to work. So they didn't do the Isser in such a matzav. For a Jew who the Isser is not going to motivate him to do Havdalah, they didn't make such an Isser. It's a massive heter from the Tzitz Eliezer. Massive heter, but according to the Shach, it works a little bit. Okay, that was the first point. Again, just to review, according to the Mechaber, if you take a pork chop and you cook it in milk, there is no Basar b'chalav b'chalal, and the Shach explains the reason being is because there's no motivation, even though if you were to make an Issa d'Rabbanan, it would be Chanan, according to the Shulchan Aruch, there's no motivation to do so. Point number 2, I just want to quickly make, although it's later the last time, we're going to go a little bit weiter. Oh, maybe I'll turn into one of those people that speaks for too long. So the Pischei Tshuva writes in Vav, he quotes at the beginning, he quotes Ayin B'Dagel Mervava. By the way, the Dagel Mervava is a commentary on the side of the Shulchan Aruch. In the red Shulchan Aruch, it's on the side. For the Oiz V'Hadar does not print it in there, but it's in Kemat every Shulchan Aruch. It's the commentary of the Noida B'Yehuda on the side of the Shulchan Aruch. It's called Dagel Mervava. And this is the Shaila. We've already covered last time Basar b'chalav d'Oraisa, Basar b'chalav d'Rabbanan, pork chops. Let me ask you a question. What about a piece of meat that's cow meat, but it wasn't shechted properly? Right? We've been talking about cow meat is d'Oraisa. Pork, not Basar b'chalav. What about cow that was not shechted properly, i.e. nevela? The famous shaila of, can I go into McDonald's, can I cook in McDonald's? You're like, oh, it's Basar b'chalav, you can't cook in McDonald's. Why is it Basar b'chalav? Because it's beef, right? It's not pork chop, right? You can go into McDonald's, you can cook pork chop and cheese, whatever, but can I cook, a cheeseburger? A cheeseburger is Basar b'chalav. Well, it's not really Basar b'chalav, because McDonald's does not have kosher meat. They have cow. They have non-kosher cow, i.e. nevela. Is there an isser of cooking and benefiting from nevela? It's also anyway to eat, because it's nevela. But is there an isser? So again, the Mechaber said no by pork, But this isn't pork. This is nevela. So if you look very quickly, the Pischei Tshuva writes in Vav, Ayin b'dogam revava. The dogam revava kasav is elashona. These are the words of the Noda B'Yehuda. Ubasar nevela, regarding nevela meat and chick and milk, so i.e. McDonald's, v'chein chaylev, and also chaylev, which is fats that are forbidden. Aser levashel b'chalav min haTorah. Aser to eat doraisa because nevela. Okay. Aser to cook doraisa. So it is basar b'chalav regarding cooking. That's done. What about benefiting? So you cannot go into McDonald's and cook a cheeseburger. Aser levashel, because it's a nevela, but it's aser bishul. What about selling a cheeseburger? So says the Noda B'Yehuda, v'loik al bishulei ava b'chila ein by iser basar b'chalav. V'chol zem b'vor b'ram. This is all the Rambam. Imnu amnam imhu aser b'hana. What about hana? Einoi mevur sham. The Rambam doesn't address it. Avo b'pirush mishnayis mevur she'einoi aser b'hana. The Rambam says there is no Isser Hana on Basar Nevela. Now, if you skip a few lines, he quotes right before the end, he says, I'm Pri Megadim, dinaktina de Asr Bahana min HaTorah. The Pri Megadim disagrees. So it's a machlokes, Pri Megadim, and Rambam. So it's a machlokes haposkim whether there's an Isser Hana on Nevela. So you cannot go into McDonald's and cook a cheeseburger. Whether you could sell a McDonald's cheeseburger is a machlokes, Rambam, and Pri Megadim. Good. Let's just go a little bit weiter. I understand it's late. Just keep going. The Mechaber, let's go the second point of the Mechaber. The Mechaber says that chicken and milk is only rabbinic. Chicken and milk is only rabbinic, and therefore you're allowed to cook it. You're allowed to benefit from it. You just can't eat it rabbinically. That was the second point. Now this to us is a given. Chicken and milk is like a given that it's d'Rabbanan. I want to quickly run through the Shach in Daled, because the Shach in Daled says, I just want to do the Shach in Daled, and then the Taz and the Shach in Hey. So we'll just do that about 10 minutes and then we'll stop. The Shach in Daled says it's actually a machlokas. There were opinions that held that chicken parm is aser doraisa basar b'chalav. We don't paskin that way, obviously from the Shulchan Aruch, but there were opinions that held that way. Let's just see it inside. The Shach says, Dasa Mechaber, the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch is, the Mechaber is always the Shulchan Aruch, the Basar chayav ha'of, that chicken and chayav, let's go focus on the chicken. Chicken and milk, einoi aser ba'achila, afilu derech bishul elamid rabbanon. It's only rabbinic basar b'chalav, and therefore mutar b'hana uba bishul legamri. Therefore you could cook it and you could sell it. Umarshal v'habach, the Marshal and the Bach disagree. They talu atzman b'divrei Maharai. Maharai is the Trumas Hadeshen. They actually rely on the Trumas Hadeshen. B'hagoy Sharei Dura, in his commentary to the Sefer Sharei Dura. B'mashakosav, because he said kosher lahakol neged Taisus. Okay, this is actually very interesting. Taisus basically says as follows: why is it that we wait 6 hours after chicken? It's a weird thing. The whole 6 hours thing. Think about it. You can't, if it's not cooked together, right? If it's not cooked together, it's only d'Rabbanan. So I eat a burger, no cheese, just a burger. I want to have milk. So you say, no, you gotta wait 6 hours. Okay. Even if I were to drink milk right away afterwards, they're not cooked together, so it's only rabbinic. And yet Chazal were super strict and said, not only could you not eat them together, you have to wait 6 hours, which we'll get to in a few weeks. Okay. So why am I waiting by chicken? Chicken's only d'Rabbanan to start with. Why am I waiting 6 hours? So says Taisvis, it must be if you wait 6 hours by chicken, it's because you hold chicken as d'oraisa. So they Bach and then Marshal make a lot of sense. They say, well, listen, we wait 6 hours by chicken. According to this math, that means that we hold chicken and milk are d'oraisa. He says, "Shekasav kashal hakol neged ha'toises lakach pasku." Therefore, they conclude the basar chayav ha'of b'chol of d'oraisa, that they follow that chicken and milk is d'oraisa because we wait 6 hours from this. Ubesifri, but says the Shach in my Sefer, I think it's a commentary on the Beis Yosef called Divrei Ha'aruch, Shach Ha'aruch. He says in my Sefer hechzakti divrei ha'omrim, I follow those views that say Shu midrabanan min hashas. I prove from Shas that it's only d'Rabbanan, that chicken and milk is only d'Rabbanan. The Hevesi Shem Shekin das harbe poskim ma'od. Majority of poskim to hold this way. Ve'af ma'arai lo ka'omar el koshel ha'hokol neged ha'toises shloi lechol gvina achar basar oif. And he says, again, I know it's getting late, I'm going to slow down. He says, She'af ma'arai lo ka'omar el shekosha l'hokol neged ha'toises. That even the Trumas Hadeshen did not say that it's d'oraisa. He just said based on that math it's d'oraisa. Because we wait 6 hours. Even he agrees it's d'Rabbanan. He's just saying it's strange that we wait 6 hours, not that it's d'oraisa. Shari Kosev, and skip a few lines, and he says, Ube'emes yesh lomar, I'm sorry, derech acheres, a few lines later. Da'af l'may dekaimel and basar of b'chol derabanan, asa lechel gvina miyad achrav. He says it's very simple. We paskin that it's derabanan, and you still have to wait 6 hours, because Chazal were super strict. That's what I mentioned in the beginning. Chazal is super strict by these things. So it could be that we wait 6 hours, but it's only derabanan, and that's the psak, and the ends at the last line, he says, V'hari kasav harambam, shaha oimer basar oif b'chol of asr min haTorah over b'bal toisef. That if you think that chicken and milk is daraisa, you're over bal toisef. You're adding to the Torah. So it's super, super derabanan. Okay, one last point, and we'll end with this. The Mechaber then said that if you take fish and milk, it's perfectly fine. And that's the minig of Klal Yisrael. I don't eat it personally, but people eat cream cheese and lox. That's like the most Jewy thing possible, is to have that. That's perfectly fine. Look at the Taz in Gimel. The Taz in Gimel says an astounding thing. He says, Bebeis Yosef. In the Beis Yosef, Kosuv, the Beis Yosef's commentary, he says the following line. Umikol Mokoim, the Sfardim will appreciate this, Ein le'echel dogim b'cholav. You cannot eat fish and cheese together, fish and milk together. So we call it lox cream cheese sandwich is off. Why? Menei hasakana, because it's dangerous. Now, what is this a reference to? I don't know. The closest I can think of is fish and meat we don't eat together because of danger. So says the Beis Yosef, the same halacha applies to fish and milk. But says the Taz, v'hu ta'us sofer. It's a mistake in the printing. The printer messed up. When the printer said you can't eat them together because of danger, he put in the wrong word. What it really the Shulchan Aruch had written was fish and meat. And he changed it fish and milk. There is no source. To sofer, v'tzarich loimer im basar kemuzkar b'arachaim. V'chein kasa b'darkei Moshe shenisariv laHabeis Yosef. It's actually not a printer error. The Beis Yosef wrote the wrong word. The Beis Yosef, instead of writing meat, wrote milk. Meaning, there's a source from Gemara not to eat fish and meat together. The Beis Yosef wrote the wrong word, and he also wrote fish and milk. But it's a complete mistake, says the Taz. There's no source for it. It's a mistake. The Beis Yosef wrote the wrong word, completely made up, and therefore it's allowed. The Shach similarly writes in Hay, Kasav Ateres Zahav, the Levush, in his commentary, Ateres Zahav says, Mikol Mokoim ein le'echol dogim b'chalav, you should not eat fish and milk together, Minei Sakana, because it's dangerous. Commotion is bar ba'arachaim. Ube'emes nimsha achar Beis Yosef, the Levush is following the Beis Yosef. Shekasav kain, Aval hu toos, it's a mistake. Kilo nizkar sham el dedagim in basar. There is no source. The source is fish and meat. Now, just a couple things. The Shach and Taz obviously hold it was a printer's error. It was a mistake, the wrong word. So there's no problem of having fish and milk together. I'll just say this to back up the Shach and Taz. Not that they don't need me backing up, but I will say this: this whole concept of fish and meat, which was legitimate, fish and meat we don't eat together, right? You don't eat them together. You have to rinse your mouth out in between because it's dangerous. The majority of poskim, Magen Avram, the majority of poskim say that the danger of fish and meat is not a spiritual danger. It's not like a hocus pocus. It was a physical danger. The doctors back then said that if you eat fish and meat together, it causes askara. Askara is like some sort of closing of the throat. I don't know, some sort of disease, leprosy, whatever they want to call it. The point is, it was a physical danger. So, you know what the Magen Avram writes? That because of this, because it's a physical danger, the doctors nowadays say it's not a physical danger. So says the Magen Avram, even fish and meat should technically be mutter. Now, we don't follow that way. We are strict. If a person has fish and meat together, we don't eat it. But the truth is, that's just a chumrah, shebachumrah, because it doesn't really apply anymore. That's why, by the way, the Rav Shechter has a tshuva where he talks about the OU policy on Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce is a fish sauce. You know what that is. Worcestershire sauce is a fish sauce that it's a sauce that has anchovies in it that's used as a steak marinade. So the policy of the OU is that if it's less than shishim in the tube, they will not write OU fish with a fish symbol. They'll just list it as an ingredient. Even though there's a little bit of fish in there, l'chora, if it's a poison, you should be machmir. No one, if you had a drop of poison in a cholent pot that was 1 in 100, 1 in 500, would you eat the cholent? It's bottle. Of course not. It's poison. So l'chora, you should be super strict with fish and meat. But says Rav Shechter, the whole thing nowadays probably doesn't apply anymore. So I'm not going to add to it. I'm not going to be stricter. If it's bottle b'shishim, it's fine. And therefore, it's listed as an ingredient. Fish is in the ingredients, but not as a symbol. Fine. So says the Shach and the Taz, this whole thing probably doesn't apply anymore. And now I'm supposed to apply it to fish and cheese as well, and fish and dairy, when it was probably a mistake from the Beis Yosef, no thank you, and they don't add to it. I just will say this, Rav Ovadia is strict. He's strict on everything other than by butter. I don't know if he's... By butter, he's lenient, but he's strict. But he's strict in general. The reason why... The Ben Ish Chai. So look at the Pischei Tshuva. I'll tell you, and we'll end with this. The Pischei Tshuva is in Tes. Ayin berhetiv, v'ayin b'tshuvas chinuch beis Yehuda, shemekayim divrei helavush, de'osil le'echel b'cholav. He holds that it is a problem to have fish and milk. Mishum dechokar eitzel chachmei harofim. Chinuch beis Yehuda is in the 1800s. He says he asked doctors, they said that the doctor said that if you cook fish and butter, it's okay, but fish and milk is a problem. That's what the doctors in the 1800s said. I don't know. The dogim mekarim ma'od, because fish causes the body to drop in temperature. The gama chol of rau mazik l'guf, and dairy is also stamazoi bad for a person. V'chein kasav ha-primigadim mishim knesses ha'yikadola, the dogim im cholav yesh sakana, u'bechama v'shuman ha'nikol ma'agabi cholav ein sakana. He also said that milk is a problem, butter is okay. But this is the key. I think this was the key for Rav Ovadia. The whole thing is they say that Shulchan Aruch, he wrote the wrong word. It's a tos. There's no source for it. It was a printer's error. Rabbeinu Bachai in Mishpatim says the same thing. A printer's error in two places, it's a little bit more tricky. It's a little bit harder. So because Rabbeinu Bachai al Torah in Parshas Mishpatim also says not to eat dairy and fish, Rav Ovadia says a printer's error in both places, unlikely. And therefore Rav Ovadia is a little more strict, and Sfaradim are a little bit more strict. But the Shach and the Taz, again, they say butter's okay, but not milk. But like I said, the Shach and Taz are completely makel. All right, we'll stop here. We'll pick it up next time.